PitchCon here. So let me bring everybody into this stream right now, and I'm gonna get out of here. See you guys.
Get out, Nick. All right, welcome everyone. Okay, I don't know where Janice is. She'll probably be here at some point. Nick will add her, but I want to start by just having everyone introduce themselves, and I guess we can just go in the order that you are on my screen. And so I basically just want you to tell the good people, what do you do? How long have you been, kind of in the industry, whether, formally or informally, and what do you want people to know about you? So we'll start with Ellen.
Hey, my name is Adair, and I just want to preface this with, if there are like echoing audio issues, let me know. I'm borrowing my husband's computer because my video doesn't work. So I was not sure if this is going to work. So I'm an actor primarily. I do both theater and TV. And I have also loved baseball for my whole life, but I feel like I don't even deserve to say that I'm part of the industry, but I guess that I am now. And I think that, that period of time is really maybe only like a year and a half. I have been playing fantasy baseball for only like 5 years. So yeah, I'm also a total faker. And it was the Pied Piper Justin Mason who just said, "Hey, do you want to be on the Sleeper and the Bust?" And I was like, yeah. And I sort of feel like everything else since then, getting to be on other podcasts and then getting to be on MLB Network and stuff like that kind of came from that. So thanks to Justin.
And Shelly, you can go next.
Hey, everyone. I'm Shelly Verougstraete. I write for Pitcher List, the Dynasty Guru, Prospects 365, Rotographs. Over the Monster, I pretty much write anywhere and everywhere. I'm a major Red Sox fan.
Woo!
Yeah, woo! Yeah, I mean, I've been playing fantasy baseball for probably about 6 or 7 years, and I've been kind of writing about baseball for probably about 2. This kind of Justin Mason, God bless him. He gave me an avenue to just write about fantasy baseball, and it's just something that's kind of just progressed from there. So I'm just this panel, I'm just so excited to be a part of.
And then Kate, you can go next. We're telling people, what do you do? How long have you been in the industry? And then what do you want people to know about you?
I'm Kate Preusser. I'm the managing editor of Lookout Landing, which is SB Nation's Mariners blog. I have been doing that for 3 years, but writing there for another couple of years before that. Recently, I've really gotten into scouting and have attended a lot of events for women in baseball, some of the stuff that MLB has done to kind of reach out to try to diversify the workforce. So I'll talk about that a little bit if people are interested in hearing about resources and places you can go, and specifically to the scouting side some. And I'm sitting here, I'm a Mariners fan, and so I've got my Edgar Martinez poster of him standing in front of the Kingdom. That's my vintage, it's bat attitude. And it's a prized possession. And then on the other side behind me back here is my signed photo from when I met him. So he's really the reason I got into the game. So I'm bummed that there's no baseball, but excited to get to share a little piece of kind of my world with you.
Cool. And then Sara, you can go.
Yeah, so I'm Sara Sanchez. I write about baseball at Bleed Cubby Blue. I'm also the host of their podcast, Cup of Cubby Blue. Previously, I did some writing at Short Relief with Baseball Prospectus as well. And honestly, I was thinking about this, my first byline actually came when I was 13 years old, but I've only been doing this seriously as an adult since 2016, late 2016. So really excited to talk about this today, and thanks for having me.
Cool. And then Janice, I just told Kate, but basically we're just telling people where you're from, what you want people to know about you, and then how long you've been in the industry.
Oh, yeah. I'm Janice Scurio. I am located in Evanston, Illinois. I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I have been covering the White Sox for about a good year now. So I was covering the White Sox for SB Nation up until about 2 months ago, where our site was acquired by Sports Illustrated. So I have been covering the White Sox for Sports Illustrated for about 2 months.
Sweet. So we're basically going to be talking kind of in 3 sections, and it depends on just how the natural flow of the conversation goes. But basically, like getting into the industry and then being in the industry, and then obviously what needs to change in the industry, because as is, like it's not what we want it to look like. And so I think it makes sense to begin talking about just your respective paths to being where you are now and what your experiences are like, and then if we have time, we'll open it up to Q&A, but I have a lot of questions prepared, so perhaps not. And then I just want to mention that like this panel specifically aimed at, I think, educating our incredibly non-diverse industry, and then also to help women and people of color and non-binary folks find their footing, because it's a lot easier, or it's a lot harder when you're not a white male. So yeah, I think first I just wanted to talk about, the path to just where you are now. So like, what did that look like? And as kind of a couple side things, like what were some things you struggled with getting into the industry? And I know that's like a really vague term, especially for you, Ellen. But like also, what were you fearful or anxious about? And so maybe we can start with you, Kate.
Sure. I think that the way that I got started was through writing fan posts, which is what I would encourage anyone. They can't know about your voice if your voice isn't out there. So even if it's just like your own personal blog, or it's just sort of writing fan posts for your local SB Nation site, which I know we're always looking for, there are tons of different places where you can get involved, and you just have to take that first step forward, because that's how people get to know you. That's how you start to build a network of connections. I will say it's really scary. It's really scary to get started. It's for me, at least, I didn't grow up playing baseball. I'm actually really terrible at it, like so incredibly bad at the actual physical playing of baseball. So I was like, this isn't my space. I don't belong here. Why would people care what I have to say? And you just have to get over that, and just like, if you have a passion for it and you have things you want to say, you have to just say them, and people will listen.
I know, Sarah, I talked to Sarah and Kate briefly yesterday. You had some thoughts about kind of the path that you took also to kind of getting to where you are now, if you want to share that.
Yeah, I can. Although I feel like a couple of things jump out at me now from where I'm at. So I sometimes feel like writing about baseball was kind of an accident for me. I was a frequent commenter on Bleed Cubby Blue, which is the Cubs SB Nation site. And I had written a lot of things about how I felt about different issues, specifically when the Cubs traded for Aroldis Chapman. I was pretty upset. I had written a lot of stat stuff and other things. And so the managing editor there, Al, just asked me if I wanted to write things now and again. And I got started kind of on accident. Like, I happened to be hanging out around outside Wrigley in 2016 when they won the NLCS, and I was there right when they started writing with all the chalk on the walls of Wrigley. I took some great pictures and told Al if he wanted them for a post, he could use them. He asked me to write it up instead, and I did. And, it was funny because later he told me he had been kind of looking for a woman to put on the masthead, and I happened to just kind of like fit that bill at that time. But now I can say, I'm on our Facebook page, our Twitter account and whatnot, and I look at those things, and dudes reach out to him all the time asking if they can write for the site. And
literally
and he had to come to me and be, yeah, he was literally like, had to come to me and be like, hey, you have the pictures, you were there, write the story. And 3 years later, here we are, and I have the podcast there, which I love. It's totally my baby. We just celebrated a 1-year anniversary, and I've written hundreds of articles for the site, and I get to do stuff like this, which is great.
And then I think at this point, anyone can just jump in, because I think all of your paths are really unique and really interesting. So I guess just whoever wants to just follow each other.
Sure, I'll go. So I was actually recruited. I was tweeting a lot about baseball. honestly, my social media presence, in my opinion, is kind of a mess. I use my Twitter account for a lot of library advocacy, as I was a librarian for many years. But of course, too, as things came around, I started tweeting a lot about the White Sox. And I was tweeting a lot, especially in defense of Tim Anderson and the bat flip controversy last year. So I essentially just fervently defended his right to do so because, hey, the game needs to be fun. We need to see players expressing themselves. And as we all know, MLB does a crap job of marketing themselves and their players. So I think if they kind of invested a little more time into Tim Anderson in particular, then maybe we'd be in a little bit more of a better place right now. But essentially, the editor at Southside Sox, the SB Nation White Sox site, saw my tweets. He saw me fighting with a Royals fan, I guess, and he was so incredibly moved by, I guess, my crap that I was posting that he slid into my DMs and was like, "Hey, we really think that you should write for us." And of course, I mean, kind of like what Sara was touching upon, that like I really didn't like necessarily see myself in that kind of environment. And it took me a while to kind of convince myself to say, hey, this is actually something I can do, because Kate also mentioned this too, that I need to develop my voice and kind of put my voice out there and kind of establish and discover myself as a writer. And since then, I've been just doing game recaps, which is super fun. I've kind of discovered what I like to write about. I've done a few player profiles, and a lot of it is just so incredibly fun. So it's been a nice journey of just fun discovery for me.
I'll go ahead and go, just because I want to be able to save the best for last, and that's not me. I'm really honored to be on this panel with these women that I personally just admire so much. Kate, your writing is the best, and I want to read your novel whenever that happens. Shelly, I just think you're the smartest. Sara, I have loved your writing since I read it on Short Relief. Janice, I didn't know about you until this year, but you're so awesome, and I'm so glad to know you now. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. I do feel like one of these things is not like the others of this particular panel, but I'm really grateful to be here. I was remiss in mentioning that I do write at the Turf. I don't write about fantasy. I just write about the Phillies. And I do also have my own podcast, Take Me Into the Ball Game, which is just grading baseball movies on the 20 to 80 scouting scale. So that's sort of like combining the two things in my life that I love most. But yeah, I think it's actually been very validating for me to hear, Sara, your story, and Janice, your story, because I also feel like perhaps I continue to feel like I maybe don't deserve to be here. And it was only because, a friend of mine, Ernie Pakopoulos, who runs Fenway Nation, was like, hey, do you want to write something for our site? And I was like, me? And sort of similarly felt that way when Justin was so nice to ask me to be on Sleeper and the Bust. And yeah, as I said, everything just sort of came from there. People who had heard me on a podcast were like, would you like to be on my podcast? And so I said yes. And a friend actually connected me with the editor at the Turf. He had read some stuff that I wrote and knew that that Justin was looking for some writers, and so that's how that happened. But yeah, I think I'm really grateful to people reaching out to me and asking me if I want to be on things, because really I feel like I'm just a dweeb. So take it away, Shelly.
Yeah, I think at most points in my writing career, I've just felt like the dweeb, and I have no idea what I'm doing here. But basically, my journey, like I said earlier, kind of started with Justin Mason. I mean, he was like, if you want to write for Friends with Fantasy Benefits, go on, write, do whatever you want. And that's kind of where it started. And it was just fun for me because I would get into like Fangraphs and StatCast kind of just holes, and I would just like dig in, and I would just like just spout to my husband about all this stuff. And he's like, I really don't care. So then I could just get on my keyboard and just like write about this stuff and just release it. And it was just great. And it was just really good for me. And that is what I enjoyed about it. And then Jeff Zimmerman, who writes for Rotographs, was like, you want to write for us about prospects? Because I mean, I was kind of like doing like some prospect stuff as well, because I'm in like so many dynasty leagues. It's crazy. And I just remember like that first like Twitter DM that I got from Jeff Zimmerman. Like I literally had to like look at my phone a couple of times and like, okay, is this actually Jeff Zimmerman who is actually contacting me? And it's just kind of like snowballed from there. And I honestly don't know why, but I'm like totally loving it. Just being able to just talk with just anyone and everyone about the game that I love. It is just so great. And this, honestly, this community is just so amazing. And it's just awesome.
Well, Shelly, I think we know why that everyone has reached out to you after reading your stuff, but
it's because you're the smartest.
But yeah, I think one tool, for getting reach is Twitter, and I'm sure that a lot of you have used a lot of different means in terms of getting to where you are now. But Janice, I think that you're kind of the Twitter queen of all of us. So can you talk about kind of how you use that as kind of a means of getting to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned before, I would just tweet about the White Sox in any method I could. So even if it was just like short thoughts, even if it was just like a short blurb about like Lucas Giolito's surge to success last season, even if it was just small things like that. I would have other White Sox fans kind of following me, and we would kind of build community in that regard. There are a couple of really strong White Sox fan communities on Twitter as well. One of them being the 108. So that community kind of involves, just people talking about baseball, people kind of just sharing their passion for the game they love. And of course, too, just being a woman, there honestly aren't that many of us, or at least that I've interacted with. So it's also been a tool to find other female White Sox fans, other female baseball fans too. And also too, it's just a medium to get my work out there and kind of make sure it has the widest audience possible.
Yeah, and I think, after talking with Nick and writing myself for, I think, almost 2 years now, one thing that I regret is, like, I use Twitter as a tool, but I was really bad at it. And I don't even know if Kate knows this, but Kate's been following me. We've been mutual since, like, 2013, I think.
Really?
Yeah. It was my own blog. I didn't use my identity, so Kate might hate me. She just doesn't know it. But yeah, so like Reddit was one kind of resource that I wish I would have used. And, it's not good for all types of work, but what to you all are kind of resources that you think would be a really nice way to shoehorn your way into the industry?
I just want to say, like, I definitely think Twitter has a lot of drawbacks and there's a lot of toxicity on there. And especially as we've kind of gone through this time with no baseball, I've really had to limit the amount of exposure that I have to it lately, which is tough because if you're not on it, then you're like, I'm missing out. But when you're on it a lot, it can be kind of that energy suck. But curating your Twitter list so that you follow people who broaden your perspective, teach you things, and are generally like positive places. And I just want to say, like, don't be afraid to reach out to people, like DM them, connect with them. And that's something that I personally struggle with because I'm always like, why do you want to hear from me? But it was amazing to me. I think of all of us as so accomplished in our fields, and all of us had this same story of like imposter syndrome. And when I went to it was Take the Field. So it's trying to get more diverse people into MLB, something that MLB itself puts on every year at the winter meetings. I heard this thing that women can have 8 out of 10 characteristics on a job application, and they'll look at the job description and say, oh, I'm missing these 2 things. And men can have half of them and be like, this job's a great fit for me. And so the number of women who will self-select themselves out of something. I mean, I think it's a problem in our community in people who don't feel like they belong for whatever reason. So send that DM, slime it into, I want women and non-binary people and people of color in my DMs. Please pitch me. Please come find me. Like, we'll find a way for you to contribute. But that's something that I, as an editor, am always seeking, is different or diverse voices. And I find that I have to go find them rather than the other way around. So Twitter can be a great tool for that. And pitch me, please.
And Shelly, you're more of a scouting type, dynasty prospects kind of person. So what was your experience like, in, just the way that the reception was when you talked about prospects in the way that, people generally do?
Yeah, to be honest, it was a lot more accepting than what I thought it was going to be, because I kind of just did it on my own prior to being a little bit more vocal. But really, I mean, just everyone that I meet, either being in the fantasy or when I go to minor league games that I talk to scouts, everyone is so welcoming. Like, that is what I honestly think that women, minorities just need to kind of get over it. Like, this community and baseball in general is extremely accepting. Like, we love this game, and we will talk about this game with just anybody. We do not care what you look like, what you care about. Just as long as we can talk about baseball, this community is so accepting. And that is just the hurdle that everyone just needs to get over, because everyone just loves this game, and we will talk about it.
Well, and I think that, initially, if you're just a woman out there, like, tweeting about baseball, you can get, I'll put this in the correct tense. I got this sort of like incorrect assumption for a while from a lot of like reply guys explaining to me the thing that I had just said, or telling me that I was wrong when I wasn't wrong, that like that was what it is. But the industry is completely the opposite. Like, I have felt nothing but support and like people really giving me opportunities from all of the men in the both like baseball industry and in the fantasy industry. And so I think that if somebody is feeling sort of intimidated by a certain kind of toxic masculinity on Twitter, I have to say, like, I don't actually find that within the baseball industry. Or at least
Can I jump in on that? Because I was just talking about this yesterday with Kate and Mike. I find that, like, the guys that jump into my mentions that are like trying to explain a double play to me, or explain to me how numbers work or what WAR is or whatever, are the ones that stick in my head. But like, I always forget about like the 80% of people who were like, she obviously knows what she's talking about, just stop. And I think it's worth remembering that there's a whole crew of really awesome and supportive people. I've gotten to interview some people that I like never thought I'd be able to have a conversation with. They're so supportive and they're so great. And it's like the 5% that keep you feeling like you shouldn't jump into somebody's DMs and you shouldn't pitch them and this is really hard and you're not welcome. And that 5% is just vocal and wrong. Like, what Kate said is totally true. Women need to just say, I hit most of this, I'm going to try it. My New Year's resolution was actually to pitch more stories, because to date, the way that I have written for things is people have come to me and said, I want you to write for us. And I was like, oh, well, sure, that's great. And then and those pieces went over really well. And I got a lot of good response to them. And I was like, you know what? This industry is not about people coming to you and asking for you to talk. Like, this industry is about you telling people what you have to say and getting them to say, yes, I want to hear that. And so like, my New Year's resolution was literally to pitch more. And also, total aside, this is a Boston friendly podcast because I'm in my Bruins gear right now, but just shout out to Boston.
So in terms of I mean, I'm happy to hear that everyone has had really good, at least better experiences than I would have anticipated. What do you think that people in, I guess, positions of more privilege can do to be better allies for whether it be women or people of color or I can't talk today, non-binary people in sports?
I would say that, like, just because you create a space, you're like, it's very important to not just participate in tokenism. Like, we need a woman on our masthead. We need a woman for this. The space has to be set up. Like, it's not, you can't just take a woman and stick her into your all male writing community and expect that everything's going to go great. Like, just because you have a woman there being representative. And it's also not to, so, I mean, this is coming a little bit from my own perspective. Like, when I started writing and was one of the only, or one of two women at LL, it was just, it was rough at times to try to match up like what I was trying to express sometimes with like, but this is the way we've done this. And, I got a comment once that LL wasn't my personal diary, and I shouldn't write something because of that. So, it was tough, and it was a learning curve with that and with the commenters. So everyone has to commit to doing the work. And I mean, I think it's very similar to like sort of what we're seeing going on with racial justice right now. Like, you can say the words, but you have to commit to also putting in the work. And so that's what I would like editors to think about, is that it's not just being like, oh, yay, represent, like ticking a box. It's actually reconfiguring your entire space to be more inclusive.
That's absolutely true. And it's not enough to just hire women or hire writers of color. But of course, I mean, they need to feel encouraged. They need to feel supported. And say, are you promoting their work? Are you making them feel important? Are you making them feel valued?
Are you involving them in decision making?
Exactly. Do they have a seat at the table?
Yes.
Precisely. So this is definitely applicable to a lot of other professions that also kind of claim to struggle with diversity. So like higher education is definitely one of them too, but that's a story for another day. But to make things inclusive, you just gotta most definitely just put the work in, as Kate said.
And I think perhaps think about, would I do this if this person were a man? Maybe always a helpful question to ask yourself, because I haven't felt this double standard in my sort of life as a baseball person, so dubbed by Pitcher List. Thanks, Pitcher List. But I have as an actor, absolutely, and I have like in my support jobs in the service industry, absolutely been like, oh, I am getting treated very differently because I am a woman versus my coworker who is a man. My voice is not being valued. So I think that's, always something to ask yourself and think about.
Yeah, I think that's really important to think about. And I think kind of on the other side of that, because, it's really hard to lean on one side or the other, because on one hand, we want to include as many people as possible. And then with Kate, what Kate was saying is, we can't just include people because of their identities. I often hear across sites, across people, just whatever, you say like, I mean, when I, start anywhere, I'm like, hey, it's kind of weird that I'm like the brownest person here because I'm half Filipino. So like, that's a problem. And, you get met with, well, it's really hard to recruit women or people of color when they don't apply. So what do we think can be done to include and reach more diverse and marginalized voices, and how can we change intent into action?
I mean, I have a really simple one, and I'm speaking about this more from my day job than from my contributing at BCB job. Young people who are passionate about sports and who want to write will do that if they have the means to do that. And if they don't have the means to do that, you're not going to get their time because they're busy doing things that pay them money. So one of the biggest problems this industry has is that it asks people to contribute for free for a really long time before you can possibly get any recognition or pay for it. And you are not going to get a lot of really talented people of color and young people and young women applying for your job if your job doesn't pay anything, right? When those people could take their talents to other places. And so I think one of the reasons that the industry is as monochrome as it is because the people who have the means to take an unpaid summer or 2 or 5 learning the industry and making those connections are not the people who are first generation college students and are not the people who are trying to like make a name for themselves right off the bat. So you need to meet people where they're at. You have to pay them for their talent.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And MLB is starting to do that. Like they recognize that there's a problem with that. And there are diversity fellowships that you can apply for out of school that are reserved for women and for people of color and traditionally underrepresented communities, which is cool and great. That still is like a lot less money than that person could make going home and working in the service industry for a summer. So I think one of the most pernicious ideas in baseball, and it's something that we're seeing right now, is that you're lucky to do this and you're fortunate and players are lucky to get paid to play a kid's game. I've heard the director of analytics for the Mariners bragging before on a podcast about the fact that they're able to pay Ivy League graduates so much less to work in baseball to do sort of the same kinds of things that they could do for a very high level company, right? Like, oh, we get these Ivy League kids in here and we can pay them, you know, pennies on the dollar. And that's portrayed as like a good thing because, I don't know, capitalism. So just pushing back against that wherever you can and with whatever power you have. I mean, one thing that I can do at LL is make sure that my writers of color have that when there's opportunities for extra funding opportunities, I can put them to the head of the line. Like I can say, hey, do you want to take on this? I can ask them first. Do you want to run our podcast? Like that's an extra revenue driver. I do make sure everyone at LL gets paid, even if it's small. So just kind of exercising the amount of power you have and also pushing back against that idea publicly and wherever possible that yes, this is a great game to be involved in and it is very fun, but it's also still a job. And we need to work against this idea that like you should inherently take lower pay in baseball because you're enjoying the work as opposed to if you're getting really well recompensed, because it drives young people out of the industry and it drives people of color away from it.
Janice, did you have something to add a couple minutes ago? I know it was a while ago, but
Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with Sarah. That's all.
okay. And yeah, I think in terms of just like, yeah, once like it's already hard to get into the industry, but yesterday Kate and Sarah and I talked about kind of, you know, like feeling unrepresented. And then also, I mean, there are just a lot of issues, but I think specifically, it feels like people like Kate and Shelly are targeted because, and I know that it hasn't necessarily been your experience, Shelly, but, you know, just like Kate talked about, like when she's at the ballpark, like what do lay people think? Like, who do they think you are?
The players' moms. That is so hard. That just started happening the last couple of years. Which one is yours? I'm like, oh my God, I'm so old now.
But you know, just like actually sorry, like once you're actually in the industry, you know, and also just like the types of things that women are asked to write about. So it's like you know, we talked about like, hey, you know, I don't even remember his name because he's stupid. Addison Russell. Yeah,
Addison
thank you. Like
Fine.
girlfriend. You
40,000 words.
Yeah, why don't you write about that? So has that been your collective experience, you know, in writing about just in writing, or, you know, Ellen and just, you know, being on baseball Twitter, kind of almost being like black sheeped in that way?
You mean sort of being asked to write about something specifically because you are a
Yeah.
woman. Like,
Mhm.
oh, you're a woman, so you will naturally be interested in writing about a domestic abuser.
Mhm.
Well, I for me personally, that has not offended me because I am like actually really interested in writing about a domestic abuser. I feel like it's as much as it is talked about, I feel like it's not talked about enough. I feel like baseball has gotten better but doesn't do enough to address it, and I have a lot of very strong feelings about that, and so I don't mind expressing that in like 6,000 words of prose. But I guess I do feel like, you know, there's an interesting double standard, where I think that your opinion is treated differently because it is a woman's opinion. And sometimes I think that's a good thing. Like, obviously we don't want to just hire diverse voices in order to have diverse voices, but diverse voices are going to give us a greater diversity of opinion, and a greater diversity of opinion is a very desirable thing. But on the other hand, you know, I feel like there's a certain amount of people being like, "Oh, I'm surprised you know so much about baseball." And that's not a negative thing that that person is saying. But on the other hand, I'm like, "Yeah, but you wouldn't be surprised if I knew this much about baseball if I were a guy." So, yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question, or did I just complain for a little
I
while?
think so. No, you you kind of touched on some of it. You know, just I don't know. I just feel like I've even witnessed that kind of thing in general. But maybe it is just because people are attracted to these topics because of their identities. It feels more pertinent to them. Because I almost wrote an article. I had to do some research with Colin Charles, and we spent a lot of time on it. I feel really bad because like he scraped a lot of data with R, and we were looking into basically racism in the MLB. And you know, like, is the MLB just being inherently kind of racist in the way that they're suspending players? Like, is there a discrepancy in you know, the number of games that different people get? And it seemed like, yeah, sometimes, but the evidence wasn't good enough for like me to write about it. So like, I'm interested in that because you know, I'm half Filipino, I'm a person of color, but also, you know, are like, I was just kind of wondering, do you feel compelled, do you feel pushed into those types of articles or topics in general as a whole?
I mean, since the Addison Russell thing came up, and I wrote a lot about Addison Russell, I will say I volunteered for that job. I wanted it, but I also did feel pigeonholed by it eventually, which is kind of like a double-edged sword. I knew I was the best person on staff to write about that particular story, and I volunteered to do that, and I'm very happy that I did, and I'm proud of every word that I wrote there, even though there were like multiple afternoons and evenings that were super hard, watching press conferences and whatnot, and just like absorbing all of that. But at the same time, like, it was also notable that when people would ask me to come on their podcast or ask me to come on their YouTube blog or whatever, if Addison Russell came up, I had to be the go-to person for it. It was like, and we want to know what Sara has to think. And it's just sort of one of those things where there are certain topics that, yes, women can add a lot to, but also they shouldn't have to be the only voice on the topic. Like, they should be there to make sure that the coverage is as good as it can be, right, and that the coverage is as sensitive as it can be, not as the only people talking about it.
Yeah, let women edit stories about domestic abuse to make sure that, because I think there are things that might not always occur to a male writer or somebody who's never been exposed to or known someone affected by domestic violence or has been directly affected by it. But it, as Sara pointed out, like, there's a lot of emotional labor in that sometimes, and it can be hard. Like, it's those Dateline shows and all of that. I get so frustrated at those because it's just back to back women being murdered. It's so much women being murdered. I'm like, why is this entertainment for people? This is like, my dad just sits there and gobbles those up, and I'm like, this is hard for me to watch, and he just doesn't seem to understand that. So I think for editors, being sensitive and understanding the emotional labor you're asking people to take on, in addition to the labor of writing. And if you want to volunteer for that, that's great. Personally, I do just because I am a control freak and I feel like I want to make sure the right things are being said. And especially if it's on my site, I want to be able to stand behind it. But yeah, just that sensitivity and being like, can I ask you to don't expect it as like a fait accompli for the woman on your staff to be doing the writing about domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in the last 20 minutes, I kind of want to transition into just like, it doesn't seem like that many people are asking questions, so that doesn't matter anyways. But basically, for people that are watching that like do want to get into the industry, sharing, kind of resources for them and hearing, I guess just more specifics about, like what you did, your path and everything. And then also just like I guess I'm just looking for more specificity and like what kind of changes that we want to see. And so I guess that's kind of what we're talking about right now is things that are unjust. I think that's it. Unjust. And so what kind of changes that we want to see right now that obviously just aren't taking place.
I mean, I'll just go ahead and start. Honestly, if you're a woman watching this and you love baseball and you feel compelled to write, just get out there. Just put it out there. Just put it on Twitter. Get on message boards. I mean, Pitcher List has an awesome Discord that you could just join and just talk baseball. Just get out there and just get your voice out there. That is really the best way. Just go ahead and just get yourself out there. Even if you don't end up writing or podcasting or whatever, just talking about the game that you love, it will just fill you with so much love, and it's amazing. Just go ahead and just jump in.
I think one thing that kind of prevented me from writing a lot earlier was I definitely had this fear of failure where I would tell myself, I really want to write about this, but what if, I put it out there and I'm wrong? Or someone points out all of these little errors and just kind of, tears me apart or whatnot. And I had a friend already in the industry who gave me some really good advice. She told me like, hey, you know what? Like, so what if you're wrong? I mean, we're all human. And just as long as you back up what you say and just kind of like put that integrity in your work, it's all going to be okay. So it's definitely kind of just like getting over that fear of failure. And writing itself, I believe it's an iterative process for sure, where even like, say, when you start off, you may not be all that enthralled with your work, but of course it's all just a work in progress. It's all improving over the course of time. So it's, again, just do it. Just get yourself out there, whether it's Twitter, whether it's blogging, whether it's just getting involved with the community, starting your own blog even. The sooner that you could just put your words down and kind of articulate your feelings about the sport you love so much, the better.
I have a really interesting question from Yancey, and he asked, what can we all do to make women and people of color feel more welcome on baseball Twitter? I tried to amplify the few female voices we have, but we need to do better.
Well, so I'll just say, keep amplifying female voices. If you see a woman who has like an awesome thought or idea out there, and then you see like a bunch of men like basically taking that idea and running with it, like go back to the woman, give her credit for it. Like one thing, this happens so frequently in like every profession in the universe where women say something and like men just run with it. And like, before you know, it's like, how did all these dudes get credit for my cool idea? So make sure you are giving credit where it is due. But even beyond that, maybe I heard this on a podcast once. It was not a baseball podcast, and I don't remember what podcast it was, so I apologize that I cannot give credit where it is due. But I heard of an experiment where somebody who had like a really powerful Twitter account just spent like a week only amplifying women. And then the next week, like only amplifying people of color and like looking for the voices that they could really have an impact with, and realized how hard it was to like go out and like be conscientious of that, because it was so easy to want to retweet like all the same white dudes who were saying the thing that people had heard. And look, don't get me wrong, I follow all of them. Like, those guys are awesome. They have great access. They have great stories. Like, I read them voraciously to know what is going on. But maybe make it like a thing. Like, just see if you can find 5 or 6 or 10 people that you really want to follow and see what they're working on and amplify their voices. Be deliberate about it.
I will say that I think it was last year. It's actually how I met Janice. Now we're homies. But I remember there was like kind of just someone that was like, hey, it was just a thread, like, share, a bunch of women or non-binary folks in baseball, and just like follow each other. And so that was one way that I personally gained a lot of like friends, but also just like a lot of different voices in baseball. And I still follow most of those people. I mean, I think generally I'll go through and like clean out my people I follow every once in a while. I'm like, white dude, like,
housekeeping is necessary. Housekeeping is definitely necessary for sure.
But I think
I'm glad I made the cut, Mikey.
Oh, of course. I definitely think that was really interesting, or really important. But yeah, I think, as you were saying, I think, Sarah, attribution, I think, is a huge thing. And, we need to not, as men, we need to not gloss over women's work and make sure that credit is given where credit is due. So those are my 2 cents.
I would also add, like, pushing for representation wherever you see. So women can look at a list of, we have, I'm thinking about that thing with like the 50 best Twitter accounts. I forget who did this. It was like a list of all the best Twitter.
Athletic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the Athletic just did, this was earlier, because I think the Athletic did learn from this mistake, but it was literally all white men. And of course, everyone who was not a white man looked at that list and was like, where is my voice? And people kicked up fuss, but the onus was on the people who were missing from the list to kick up the fuss about it. So when you see, whether it's like a team or any kind of major outlet or anything, and they're putting forth, like, be aware of what voices they're amplifying and use your voice to help demand that be more inclusive.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And these questions have been hard for me to answer, almost, because I think I feel like I've spent the entire week contemplating my intense privilege as opposed to myself as a member of a minority. So, but I do think that, the lesson to be taken there is that it is the people with the privilege's responsibility to call something like that out and say, we want greater representation. Yay.
Okay. And then a lot of people are asking, just like, other women in the world of baseball, whether it be fantasy or whether it just be baseball, who inspire you? And I can think of a couple off the top of my head, but I don't think that matters as much as women that inspire you all.
Well, I mean, I met Kate, Twitter met Kate because somebody had that, like, who are the women in baseball who inspire you? And I tagged Kate, and I didn't know her because her writing is the best. I really want to include all of the women on this panel on that list for me. I also really love Megan Montemuro. She writes about the Phillies for The Athletic, and Ashley McLennan, who writes about a number of teams, the Tigers, the Rays, and the Cubs, I think. Yeah, her writing is really also excellent. Those are a couple of my favorites. And Meg Rowley. I mean, she's everybody's
Meg.
Yes.
I need to give a shout out to somebody. So this person certainly kind of gave me a boost when I needed it the most. That person is Shakia Taylor, Curly Fro on Twitter. She is a fantastic person, fantastic writer. And so I met her for the first time at Sox Fest in January. And so it was my first time carrying the fancy media badge. It was all very overwhelming, just mainly because I literally walk in the door and there's Yohan Moncada and Eloy Jimenez just literally chilling there. And I start freaking the hell out. So I bring myself down by seeing Shakia because I knew her. So I introduced myself. She knew who I was. And then I was like, I need to start chatting up some of these players so I have some material to possibly write an article. And so I see Tim Anderson kind of chilling off by his lonesome. And so she's like, go talk to him, girl. And I'm like, how? So like all of these questions, all of this long mental list of all of these things I would want to ask Tim Anderson, who I have like been such a fan of for so long, all out the window. And Shakia, she brought me down. She was just like, hey, ask him what he's been working on. Ask him how his off-season has been going. Ask him how his off-season workouts are like. And yeah, that did it. I was able to have such a great conversation with Tim, and it's because of Shakia. She kind of just lit that fire underneath my bum. So thank you, Shakia.
I'm going to jump in here because retweet Shakia Taylor. She's outstanding. She hosts like these women in baseball get-togethers at Nisei, which is where I met her for the first time. And she's also just been like, I get random notes from her about pieces that I wrote, which is awesome. And she shares with me what she's writing and gives me tips. And just like when I told her my New Year's resolution, she was like, yes, that's exactly right. Let me know if you want any tips. And it was incredible. She's also brilliant. Like her piece on Effa Manley is one of the greatest things that I've ever read. And if you have not read, like right now, or as soon as this panel is done, not right now, but as soon as we're done, you should Google Shakia Taylor and Effa Manley, and you should absolutely read that entire piece. It's incredible. And the other person that I want to shout out is Cheryl Ring, who has written at Fangraphs and Beyond the Box Score, who is so positive and just like always signal boosting people that she thinks need a voice. And every time I turn around, Cheryl Ring is out there like 10 women you have to follow, 10 non-white dudes you have to follow, 10 non-binary you have to follow, like everything. It's just, she's incredible. She's also brilliant bringing the legal perspective into how we understand baseball. And I really appreciate that because I'm not a lawyer, so I would never know any of that.
Talking about non-binary people, because I know that it's difficult with like, we're just at the point where we're having women in baseball days are a regular thing. I was really missing it this year. This is actually the first women in baseball panel I've ever been on. So I'm really excited to meet that milestone today. The next horizon that I think we need to open up is non-binary people. And so to that end, Jen Mac Ramos is a really important voice. Jen has taught me about the California League specifically when I started, because like my progression through baseball has been MLB, and then realizing that like really kind of my heart is in the minors and specifically in scouting. So Jen has been like a great guidepost for that. And I think is also it's a good reminder that like when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about women and specifically about adding white women, even though I think unfortunately that's a lot of times the representation that we do get. And I recognize my privilege sitting here as a white woman to be part of women in baseball. But now we need like non-binary people in baseball. And I know that the term non-men can be offensive to men because it's like,
whatever,
you're specifically leaving us out. And I wish there was some better terminology for that, but it is an easy catch-all to say non-white men, as far as just because the amount of representation that is missing that's represented in that other group is so enormous. So I think maybe moving away from women in baseball times and into this all of these underrepresented voices. And so Jen is definitely an important voice to follow for that reason and has been hugely inspirational to me.
I think next year I'm going to pitch a non-men panel to Nick. I won't be on it, but I think it'll be cool. But yeah, Colin asked a really interesting question because like I was a little nervous about this when I was pitching it to Nick because I was looking at the roster and I was like, Nick, it's a bunch of white dudes. And I was like, I was wanting to bring, just more diversity into this event. And I wanted to avoid pigeonholing. And I felt like it was, I tried to go about this as sensitively and like delicately as possible. And I feel like I did as best as I can, but I wanted to know if, Colin basically asked, do you get annoyed by the term women in baseball, or do you embrace it? Because I think, like with a lot of things, it's really important to be aware of those differences, but also like they shouldn't necessarily be different. So I want to hear your takes on that.
I mean, the thing is, like, every time you narrow baseball down a little, so specifically I'm talking about scouting, is like, I'll show up at scouting events, I will be the only woman in the room, always. I'll sit in the scout section at a game, I will be the only woman in that section who's not a girlfriend. It's so once we have like, oh, there's a scouting panel, and we can very easily, there are a whole bunch of women that we can draw from to have on that panel. But right now, I think there's like one full-time woman scout, and it is Amanda Hopkins with the Mariners. The A's had just hired Lexi Gonzalez, who is a dope softball player from California. She just got furloughed, with the A's furloughing their entire. So it's really, really, really tough right now. And that little bit of representation that women had fought for in the scouting community also lost Kelly Rodman, who was with the Yankees, who was an amazing scout, who unfortunately passed away due to cancer earlier this winter. It's really tough. So in order for there to be women in scouting jobs, there have to currently be women in baseball panels, because we have to raise that profile some way. So I guess I see it as like it's necessary. I'm not always thrilled about it being like this separate other thing, but for now it's necessary.
So I agree with that. I think it's necessary right now, and that's just sort of where we're at, and that's very cool. And I'm happy that this panel exists. I think it would be incredible if in a year or two, every panel just had a woman on it, because there was obviously a woman who could talk about those things just as well as the dudes that were on the panel. I think it would be also incredible if every panel just had some diversity on it, because there were also people of color who could talk about those things just as well as the white people on the panel. So I think that it's one of those things where Kate is right. It's a milestone. Like, you got to have the women in baseball panel before you can have every baseball panel has a woman on it. But I don't know why you can't have that too. I was at CubsCon this year, and they were introducing the Marquee Sports Network lineup. And one of the first questions, like, they introduced all these people. They introduced all these former Cubs stars. They introduced everybody. Everybody's feeling great. The only woman they introduced was, and she's amazing. I've gotten the chance to interview her. She's awesome. But the only woman they introduced was the field reporter, Taylor McGregor. And like 2 questions in, the question is, this is a lot of dudes. You just launched a new network, and you have one woman on this stage. And, Crane Kenny, to his credit, was like, I realized that as I was announcing the panel. And that's great. And they're working on it, and that's outstanding. But you gotta, now you're aware, so fix it. You're in control. Fix it.
So in about 2 minutes, Nick's going to kick me off and kick the rest of us off. Kate shared a bunch of resources with me yesterday, and I didn't write all of them down. But if I guess each of you want to, before Nick just poops us off, if you could all share one thing, one resource, for just getting to be where you are now, before we sign off.
I'm going to pitch women in sports events, and specifically, again, from the scouting side. There is Jennifer Blatt runs a scouting school, or she did. It was the inaugural one this past fall. So connect with her. I think her website is, I will look it up. It's womenssportsschool.com. So if you'd like to get in on the scouting side, that's a great way to do it. And pitch me.
If you're really, if you want to get on like the fantasy baseball side, seriously, hit up Justin Mason. Like he is seriously one of the best in the industry, and he will his website literally got me on this panel. So his website is Friends with Fantasy Benefits. Just hit him up. He will let you write about whatever you want to write about. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah, and Justin is also why I'm here, I think, ultimately. So yeah, thanks, Justin. But all I feel like I can do is just echo the things that other people have said. I feel like, Twitter is actually can be a resource for connecting you to people that you wouldn't get to meet or talk to otherwise. And you get to curate whether or not, how much of a toxic hellhole it is. And so sometimes it's actually pretty nice. Like my Twitter's pretty nice most of the time. And then just always be writing. I'm, just write every single day. That's what I do. I mean, it's not all baseball writing, but I write every single day. So yeah.
My favorite resource that I use are my colleagues. So the people that I write with, the people who are basically write with me on my site, they have been so fantastic when it comes to feedback, when it comes to, say, bouncing my ideas for articles off. And I would always be like, hey, like, am I entirely crazy for writing about this? And the answer is always no, which is, I don't know if that's what they think I want to hear, but it's always so great to have like great coworkers who will kind of just help promote your work and give you confidence in what you do.
I'm just going to agree with Ellen. I think that on Twitter, like when you see those threads that are like, here are 10 writers that you should follow them, read their work and like comment on it as you can and just keep it up. Like get to know great writers. One of the thing that I do every day that I think is probably the best use of my time is I read other writers to get an idea of what they're talking about, to get an idea of different voices, to get an idea of different angles on stories and how they're researching things. And I learned so much from reading everybody else. And then I hope to translate what I've learned into what I write.
That was everyone, right? I didn't keep track. Okay. I think that's it. I think Nick's just going to push us all off the screen. But I wanted to thank everyone, for joining me tonight. I'm happy that I wasn't, I didn't get in your way too much. So
you can never, Mikey. You can never.
Yeah, whatever. All right. Have a good night, guys.
Good night.
Right, so thanks, everybody.